Hey, it's Rebecca. Welcome to Returning, a podcast to return to yourself and the wisdom within. I'm so glad you're here with me. Thank you for returning. Today, I am returning with Samantha Wills. Samantha is a multidisciplinary creative, a writer, creator, speaker, and educator. From Port Macquarie, Australia, to the heights of New York City, where she now lives. Having built one of Australia's best known accessory brands, Samantha courageously closed her self-titled business to reclaim her name and step into her deeper calling. She shares this story with such clarity and grace, and I found it personally so inspiring and think you will too. At the end of this episode, as always, you'll find a guided soul inquiry for you to explore whatever this episode brings up and speaks to in you. I know how precious your time is, so let's jump right in by opening sacred space together. In the center of your heart, imagine a beautiful flower, and with your breath, invite that flower to open petal by petal, revealing a light in the middle. This light is your ancient self, your soul, the wisdom within. Inviting it to step forward now. And together, taking a moment to acknowledge the keepers and the custodians of the land where you are and where I am too, known and unknown. Beautiful. Let's begin. So, Samantha, okay, I want to start with a question that I actually genuinely want to ask you. It might
Okay.
sound little, but it's to do with my theory about creative people.
Okay.
I want to know because, like, your creative style is prolific and just gorgeous and so stylish and so in harmony. But in your personal life and
Mhm.
in your mind and all of that, would you say that you're like neat and tidy, or is it like chaotic?
It's chaotic. It is the most chaotic end of the scale. Thank you for those very kind words. I do appreciate that. But yeah, I don't know, I do hand in hand chaos and creativity, though. I think they actually go hand in hand. They might not make the grid on Instagram all the time, but they definitely do go hand in hand.
I love that. Yeah, I'm a Virgo, and everyone thinks Virgos are like perfectionists, like as in like everything's always tidy. But I reckon actually most Virgos and most creative people, it's like their desks are the messy ones, and it's actually almost
Absolutely.
like maybe I think our grids on Instagram maybe they're perfect because it's like we're just like trying to make order in the chaos. Would you
That is
agree?
true. I also think too in that creative process, like I like to present at the end of the creative process, be it styling a room, be it writing a book, be it putting a program together, a, in my mind, a perfect program or a perfect at my capability at the time book. So that the outcome to me is pedantically perfect, but to get there is an absolute shit show of chaos. So
Oh my God.
the duplicity of that I think is the journey.
And do you like with your creativity, does it come like you get like how do you receive your best ideas? Is it like in the shower? Is it walking? Is it like you in motion? Like how does it normally come?
Yeah, definitely the shower is an idea factory for sure. I have a true belief that ideas show up the more that we show up. So finding what that ritual or practice is, and I treat creativity like I take it very, very seriously. I show up, at my desk at the same time every day. I treat it like a job because I feel if I do that, ideas know where to meet me. And I think it's that adage of when there's a water flowing down a river and there's a blockage or it's a log or something that's crossed the river, when you remove that log, be it removing the procrastination or removing the clutter or whatever it is that is stopping you from showing up to your creativity, the ideas just flow so much more freely because one idea brings another idea, and it is that stepping stone effect.
And when you like have a big project that you're working on, whether it's like, I don't know, if
Mm-hmm.
you've written a book, you've got programs and you've had like a whole, but you're a prolific creator. Do you like have do you like have containers like as in like I am going to do this in between this time or this time, or do you need like open space or a combination?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I could do containers, but I literally sit at my desk and I'm probably working on I would say anywhere between 3 to 5 projects at a time. They might be at different points along the pipeline. I like to call it creative roulette because I'm like, if something's not flowing, rather than just, abandoning my creativity altogether, I kind of move to the next project and work on that for a while. So, obviously hard deadlines and external needs aside, if I'm working on a job for someone else and it's a hard deadline, I very much am like, what is flowing today? What am I receiving a lot of ideas for today? Intuitively, what feels right today? I think that's a huge luxury to be able to show up to your desk like that. But that's how I prefer to work, and having a few things on the go, so I'm not just like head buried in one thing at any given time.
And do you have like how do you describe what creativity is? Like do you like have a description of what you think it is, or is it just like I have no idea, it is this random thing that exists?
I think it's changed for me, I think, over time. In one part of my life, I was like, well, it's paintbrushes and pottery wheels, and it's this really traditional arts, view of
Mm,
creativity. I think now the creative, like we're put on this earth to create, be it a family, be it community, be it careers, be it we're creating it.
mm,
It really has nothing to do with the traditional arts. That's one facet of it. But to me, creativity is, for me personally, it is my lifeblood. Like if I am not
mm,
creating, I am probably sabotaging something about myself, be it my physical health, be it my spiritual health. Creativity for me is something that lifts my spirit in a way that I can move through the world um, joyfully. It's not always an easy practice, and it's not that it doesn't come with hardship. But creativity just brings me such a more joyful life.
And do you, because I love how you've just described that as like, yeah, it's like lifeblood, life force almost.
Mm.
Do you see it connected in any way to intuition and spirituality, or do you see them as different
I
things?
No, I see it all entirely as one thing. To me, when we receive an idea, that's a form of energy. So it's like, all right, how that idea's obviously come to us for a reason. It's tapped us on the shoulder, or, danced on our eyelids in a dream, or in some ways trying to make itself known to us. So, us as the form, it's like, all right, how are we going to co-create to bring that to life? Sometimes the idea is meant for us, sometimes it's meant for us to provide to someone else, sometimes that idea is the stepping stone to the next thing. So I see it all entirely as intuition. And I kind of picture ideas as these almost like energetic bubbles that are kind of always floating around us at every given time, and they're just waiting for a space to land. And space means
Mm,
awareness, it means quiet, it means kind of mindfulness, it means momentum, and it's about kind of turning down that head noise to allow space to be like, oh, okay, I found my human. All right, how are we going to bring this to life together? And I think when we're in line with that and we're receiving idea after idea, that's when we truly, well, I know for me, it's when I feel like I'm aligned with my higher self, when I am living my true authenticity, and it feels like a series of green lights. So it's, to me, it's entirely one and the same.
yeah, because I think the thing I struggle with the most with creativity is like, well, there's two things. One is
Mm-hmm.
like the when you're doing it for your livelihood, and then there's business involved and other people involved and
Right.
publishers and da 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 da. It's like this tender balance between creating and producing, and kind of
Mm-hmm.
like being the mystic or the creative or the artist and the machine,
Right.
and like that tender balance. And because you can't just be over one side, because it will never live and be brought to life, but
Right.
then it's so easy for everyone else's like desires to kind of like derive it, and then you kind of can turn into like, I'm just going to be like a creative machine here.
Yeah.
Have you had to navigate that?
I mean, absolutely. I think that, kind of what you talk about, it's like the creative commercial scale, whereas, where yourself is
Mm,
a writer, you have publishers, and there's commercial requirements, and there's marketing, and there's all these things around it. I think, and we make that decision because you could sit at home and be like, well, I'm just going to write in my journal, and I'm going to, gift these things to people that I know in my network. I don't need it to be in a bookstore. I don't need it to read. Like, we can make that choice to just be the pure form artists, or are we creatives that want to make this livelihood and, you know, venture down that commercial creative scale? And that's obviously, we make the choice how far we want to go along that scale. I think, you know, for me, I guess the biggest realization on that for me, when you talk about the productivity as a machine, when I had the Samantha Wills jewelry business, which I had for 15 years, in that time I had designed 12,000 pieces of jewelry. So, you know, from when I
Wow.
started as a 21-year-old, and it was, you know, 3 collections a year, and it was very tactile, and it was hand produced, literally producing them on my dining room table, to 15 years on, it's this huge commercial company, which is what I wanted. I'm not saying it, you know, it took hold and it was something that I didn't want. It was exactly what I wanted. But as a creative, it came to a point where I was like, am I designing now with my hands or my heart? And I think it was purely my hands at that point, because it's like, all right, well, you know, here's the matrix of what we need this season. So we need 5 earrings under $100, and we need this, that, and the other. And you kind of, it is this machine. And for me, commercially, it was huge. It could, you know, it was still on a trajectory, but creatively, there was just a void in me that I was like, all this money doesn't mean anything if that creative void is just a gaping hole. So I do understand it entirely what you're saying, and I think that there's times where, you know, if we do want to be commercial creatives, there will be times where it's like, all right, well, that is the business end of the deal. At what part of that scale do I feel comfortable sitting at? And realizing that there are, you know, and the luxury to being able to be a working creative and to earn a living from creativity is I think that element. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, wow. Well, yeah, it was actually going to be my next question around like endings and
Mm-hmm.
like when you're being called in a different direction, but where you are is working, and it's like, oh, like I remember when we had lunch that day in
Yes.
London, and
Mm-hmm.
I think you were just starting to write your book from memory, and so
Yes.
you would tell, but I don't know if you'd made the decision or not,
No.
or but you could tell some things were moving in you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, was there a moment, or was it more kind of like this sinking feel? Like, how did you get to that huge decision? I'm so inspired by that, by
Oh,
your decision to do that, by the way. I was like,
thank you.
yes.
Well, I think by the time we met, that would have been early 2018, I think, in London. And, you know, I was probably 14 years into the business at that point. And I think for me, it became, as I said, it was just monotonous to do, all right, we need this collection now, do it with your hands. Heart really wasn't involved. And it probably took me a while to
Mm.
actually recognize that. So I was writing the book. I knew I wanted to write that business journey. A relationship around that time, or not long after I saw you, broke down, and it really, really devastated me. And it's kind of one of those things where you're like, you know, why is this happening to me, kind of thing. Like, but I really saw, you know, when in hindsight now, that I was just being stripped of anything that was kind of clouding the vision of what the decisions on my path had to be. And so when that relationship broke down, I took myself upstate New York to this holistic kind of meditation retreat. I was like, all right, I'm going to just bunker here for a week and kind of get myself back together. And on the flip side of that, so this was in August 2018 by this point, and my business partner, who has been so supportive of me over the years, he's like, you know, we've built this business around you. He's like, I can tell that, you know, your heart isn't as in it as it used to be. Let us know what you need. Because essentially I was on a plane from New York to Sydney every 6 weeks. So I've kind of done that New York
Wow.
JFK Sydney flight over 100 times. And I was like, it was just wearing on me in every possible way. And so he was like, you know, do you want to move back to Australia? Do you want to put a design team around you in New York? Like, let us know how we can support you to make sure that you're okay. And it was so gracious. And I remember it was kind of the third day of this meditation retreat, and he had sent me this email that essentially was titled "The Business is at a Crossroads," and, you know, essentially outlining what I just said, where
Wow.
it's like, we will
Oh, I
support
just
whatever
got
you need.
chills.
So I'm like
Good on
reading this
him for
email. I
saying that.
know, like, just an incredible
Wow, so tapped
human.
in. Mm.
Totally. And so I thought, you know, I was up at this retreat to kind of obviously process the breakup, but also I thought my decision, because I'd ever so modestly named this brand after myself, was, you're in it for the long haul. And it's going well. Why would you leave? So as I'm reading his email, the business is at a crossroads. I kind of looked up, and this is a beautiful leafy campus. And I stood at a physical crossroads when I looked up, and to the left was this really, strong, solid path around the campus that you could see where it was going. The path to the right was more like a wood chip kind of swirling path that kind of went through the veggie patch and through the garden. And you didn't really know where that one went, but it was definitely the more creative path out of the two. And I know you will understand this, but a lot of people I explain this to, they're just like, did that happen? But I put my hand on my heart and I felt, and I audibly heard a voice say, it's time to close. And it was as simple and as
Whoa.
quick as that. And I looked around, there was no one standing around me. And I was like, it's time to close. And it was the first time I'd ever had that idea as a possibility. And it was in that moment, I was like, okay, it's time to close. So I took the path to the right, the right side of the brain, the heart, the creative path, the physical creative path. And I walked to the bookstore that night and I was like, okay, we employed, a lot of people at this point. So I'm like, this decision is much greater than me. I'm going to need a bigger sign than this. Like I need a signing sign to like confirm that this is, I'm hearing this right. And so I was in this bookstore and I was just honed in on this one book on the shelf, which was Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. And so I took it back to my cabin and I was reading it. I was like, okay, it's about, living this creative life beyond fear. Because I think also at that point, I'm like, if I'm not a jewelry designer, who am I? Like Samantha Wills jewelry is so much ingrained in who I was, in my name, like everything. I'm like, so I'm kind of flipping the pages. I was like, okay, this is kind of making sense. And then I turned the page and there was an interview with singer-songwriter Tom Waits. And in this interview, he said, as artists, we take ourselves so deadly seriously when all we're really doing is making jewelry for the inside of people's minds. And I was like,
whoa.
Okay, I got it now. I've got it. So I was like, and I was already writing, but like I was like, I'm meant to be giving this my full heart and soul and hands. And so what I did for the next 2 weeks before I told a single soul, I woke up and pretended that I had closed the company. And I asked myself, how do you feel about that? Not what do you think about it, not running it through this logic filter, because if I did that, there was no logic to what I was doing. But when I put it into my feeling filter, I was like, it feels like the right thing to do. And that's essentially how I came to the biggest decision of my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just think it's so amazing that you did that. And because, yeah, I really get, and, you started your company so young and you're such a personal brand as well. And
yeah,
I really found it fascinating, everything you shared on that around like the decision as well. Like, do you sell it? Do you change the name? Can you change the name? Is it your name? And what, all of that, like, was that a whole process or again, was it intuitive or a bit of both? We'll return with Samantha's beautiful answer after this quick break. A quick note to personally invite you to come and check out the Sanctuary. Over the years, the Sanctuary has organically grown into a thriving community of like-hearted souls from all over the world who, like you, are on a journey to deepen their connection to the wisdom within.
The one thing I particularly love about this membership is how practical the tools and practices shared by Rebecca Campbell on a monthly basis are.
Jumping into a much more spiritual container has been the best thing for me, both professionally and personally.
My favorite thing about being in the membership is being a part of a community of like-minded individuals. You can post about anything and you have this wave of humans that are going to wrap you in their arms and support you no matter what.
My spiritual practice has deepened immensely, and that's because there's so much beautiful content available at my fingertips.
Visit rebeccacampbell.me/membership. Now let's keep returning. Was that a whole process or again, was it intuitive or a bit of both?
I think I say this so truly, that moment where I heard and felt that voice, I made the decision in that moment and I never wavered from that. I think for a brand that was so personally built around an individual, and I say that like it's not even myself, like that's how I kind of looked at it at times. I think to change the value of the brand, you can sell we could have sold our production supply chain and, all the logistics around the business, but the value of the brand was the brand built around a person's story. And then I think for me, creatively, my heart is not made in a way where if I had have sold the brand on, so essentially my name, handed my name over, so I couldn't create under my name, and just kind of would have had to see, like, if you sell to a bigger group, you're like, oh, so they're making Samantha Wills jewelry that I had nothing to do with. People that don't know I've sold are going to think that's my message. And the anxiety around that to me was far greater than the money that I would have got if I had have sold it on.
I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And I obviously have my name, like being an author, like I have a personal brand as well. And it's not something that I'm very grateful for a lot of it. And it's something that I do find difficult now and then. And I really hear you with it's like, it turns into this thing that, is it a person? Is it a whatever?
Yeah.
Has that been something that you've struggled to navigate?
I think when it got to the closure point, so essentially I got called SW because my initials, because when people would call the business, it was like Samantha Wills became a product and it became a commerciable entity. So I felt like I lost that name for that period of time. And then, closing the business, I'm like, well, who is Samantha Wills without jewelry after the title? And it was really like an identity, not crisis, that sounds very dramatic, but really like finding out who I was without that being my entire adult existence. I think it's very much around, especially in the space that we're in, for your work as well, it's so energetic, and it's, even the portals through Instagram and things, like you're inviting energy in every single time. So it is difficult, and I think it does require some management for self and mental health to kind of be able to look at Rebecca Campbell as the business and the brand, and then Rebecca, the person, as a separate entity. So it is very difficult. And if you can't separate those things at times, I think it's a real recipe for a really quick spiral into something that is very hard to get out of emotionally and mentally.
Yeah. Yes. I think the bit that I've found most challenging is, there's various bits, but I think the main one is like, like we're always changing, but especially when we're really changing, and we're like, and like, I'm just thinking, I'm wondering if it's a similar kind of age with you when you went through this change. But I've read a lot about the 36 to 42 window, where it's almost like another version of Saturn Returns. It's the beginning of like the midlife crisis, where you're like, whoa, what do I really want to leave behind? And what is my big calling in the world? Was that around the ballpark for you age-wise?
Absolutely. Like, I'm 41 now, and I think, when that relationship broke, right. So it's
81 baby?
81 babies, yeah.
Yay.
But I, everyone kind of, growing up quite spiritual, I'm like, everyone warns you about the Saturn returns. I was like, no one told me about the 36 to 42, like, reversal.
No, I think it's called the Pluto square Pluto transit, and there's something else, but oh my God.
Well, someone needs to get on the branding
so
of that.
Much
and
harder.
Really,
I know.
It's
so much harder than Saturn Returns. Saturn Returns is just like the dark night of the ego, and then this portal is like dark night of the soul.
That is the best way. And I think it's because you are more equipped because you're more mature, you've got more tools in your toolbox to deal with it, and then you're like, I'm not dealing with this well. this is meant to be easier at this point. And I think it's the same process. It really strips away from you. I'm not even gonna say what no longer serves you. I think it's like what you might have outgrown, what you might have, what might be hindering, what might not be meant for you at this time of your life. And that's a really hard thing to accept, I think, in your late 30s, early 40s, because you're like, man, it's meant to get calmer and easier at this point. So it definitely keeps you on your toes, to say the least.
Totally. And then, like, with all of that timing, so were you kind of going through all of that, or you'd just been through the bulk of it, and then COVID hit? And because you were in Australia for COVID, right? You when in New York, or was it a bit of both?
We closed the doors on the final day was January 11th, 2019. So essentially we announced in August 2018 that we're closing, did a 6-month closure, closed in January 2019. And I really put my head down to kind of get the book done, but essentially like had plot twisted myself because was signed to do, a business memoir. And I was like, I'm just going to close the business. So really, kind of had to really get my head in that game to write Of Golden Dust is the book. And then it was due for release March 2020. So I wrote it essentially in New York, went back to Australia at the end of 2019 to tour it when it launched in March. And then, they'd put all this money behind the tour and all these things. And they said, we're going due to, the world imploding, we are going to have to push this back a year. So unbeknownst to anyone at the time, we're like, this COVID thing will pass. It'll be what it'll be. And then 2 years later, obviously the Australian borders were locked down, and it just became a whole thing. So I do feel very fortunate, though. We were able to tour it throughout 2021 in those open pockets of lockdown. So in a really tough situation, the publisher and my publicist did a stellar job. Yeah.
Oh, that's really good. And you're in New York now. You got a gorgeous apartment that I've been watching on Instagram. You decorating?
Yes. Yeah, I'm back in New York. So as soon as our borders open, I still had my visa over here. So, it's kind of, I feel like I'm at the stage where I'm like, even though it's been a few, since 2019, since I closed, I feel like I'm still in that transition phase of really kind of solidifying myself in the next creative part of my career and as a writer and, really kind of locking down those pillars of what that creativity and commercial creativity means to me now. So it still feels, on the almost finish line end of it, but still in that process.
And I want to ask you a question I ask all my guests, and that's, what were you like as a child, like little Samantha, that will help us understand you even more now?
Well, I'm an only child, and I think that I was a very creative child, and my parents, to their absolute credit, were like, you can do in your room creatively whatever you want, as long as it doesn't seep out a centimeter into the hallway. So I was painting murals, I had troll dolls blue tacked to the ceiling, I got Dad's screwdriver and took the cupboards off my wardrobe and put the bed in there because I wanted a canopy. I had just the creative freedom that they allowed me as a young child, I think served me so well in my creative career. So, I think being an only child too, I just begged my parents for a brother or sister, specifically an older brother is what I was begging for.
Oh, that's the dream, isn't it?
Right? Mum's like, yeah, that ship has sailed. But I think I really, my imagination, like everyone's like, oh, I had imaginary friends or this. I'm like, I had imaginary siblings because I wanted that so badly. So I think it really pushed my imagination, and you kind of had to, as an only child, really entertain yourself. So I think that was my early learning for creativity.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And do you have like a specific morning practice or spiritual practice, or just like a morning routine that you do?
I did for a long time. I think since COVID, I really struggled. It's probably the time where I should have bunkered down on such spiritual practice. But it kind of, if I pinpoint where it kind of derailed for me as a ritual, and I think my creative practice is now more my meditation practice. As I said, I sit at my desk every day. I make my coffee the same way. I sit and just getting that flow of ideas and energy feels like my meditation practice at this time in my life. So it's and not to say that won't change, but right now it's so linked with creativity for me.
And do you have anything that you like using? Like, for example, when I create, I tend to, if I'm writing, I tend to make a coffee. I do like drinking coffee when I create. Do you have anything like that? Any quirks?
Definitely the morning coffee, is a staple. In a lot of my teachings, I do teach, I suggest to students like choosing a scent. So it's like your body starts to get used to this one scent. It's like, okay, it's time to create now. And if you are working on different projects, maybe different, whether it's a new perfume, whether it's a new candle, or whatever that is for you, but like opening and closing the space with scent, I think is a really good one to get into that quirk. So that's probably my main one that yeah, I implement.
I love it. And yeah, what's your best way to work on creative blocks? Like if you get blocked, what do you have any go-to things?
I think it's very much around that creative roulette where I'm like, because if I step away from my creativity altogether, if I'm feeling frustrated, I find that procrastination spiral or that imposter syndrome spiral just engulfs me. So I really try to stay away from that quicksand and be like, all right, if my writing's not working on this project, I'm going to, even if you go and do a paint by numbers or something that doesn't require a lot of, active mind work, but it's still allowing creativity to flow. I find that creative blocks clear a little that way, but also the next piece of the information that you need reaches you that way. And it's definitely just changing chairs rather than leaving the room.
Yeah, I so relate to that. It's interesting. I tend to, when I've got a book now, I'll also have an oracle I'm working on because I find working on an oracle is so much easier because they're just little bite-sized bits. And
Right.
it reminds me kind of like when I was a creative director in advertising, and it was just like, you kind of come up with the idea, get the headline, It feels more like, okay, I'm just going to sit down for 20 minutes and get the job done. And you're like, yes.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes the book and stuff, it can just feel like,
I mean, and you've released 8 books now, have you? Is it 8 you're up to?
No, not 8. This will be my fourth, but I've got 4 oracles. Yeah.
4 oracles, okay.
So 8 all up. Yeah.
My God. And I'm like, who chooses this career? Like when I'm sitting there writing, like someone's forced my hands to the keyboard. I'm like,
what
who chooses this?
are we doing?
Like, I was like, that was you, Samantha. That was you that chose that. So I'm like, oh, no one to blame.
It's a special type of agony, isn't it?
It really is. And I'm like, my partner describes it like when I'm really mad at myself, and I'm like a horse booking a holiday where it's like just hitting the keyboard so hard. It's like, who chose this? He's like, oh, you did.
Oh my God, it's so true. It's so hard because it's like, I love it and I hate it all at once.
Yeah. Or what's the saying? It's like, I hate writing, but I love having written. And I'm like, oh, what a juxtaposition of a life. So
it's so true. Yeah, I think that's what I often say to people who want to write. I often speak at, there's this workshop, the writer's workshop I teach at, and I just say, look, if you're in the room, you're definitely a writer, because it's quite an odd thing to want to do, like sit alone for all that time and just write.
And dig to like the darkest parts of your soul and then be like, how do we put that into words on a page to sell into a commercial setting? Awesome.
Oh my God. Exactly. So if you're called, just do it.
Yeah.
Or don't.
Exactly. And I do think to that, like that torture that we do talk about, to me, not doing that is a greater torture. So I think if that puts into any perspective, it's like you got to choose the lesser of two evils.
Totally. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, I think if I didn't do it, it would just eat me up.
Yeah.
And so you just have to do it. And I do find that like the best things I've ever written have actually been like through the blocks or through going through something difficult, or like through like being angry and frustrated. Like it's like, I think you can kind of tap into something beyond yourself when you do that. Have you experienced that?
I mean, absolutely. And I think, when creativity as a healer is very much like, when I'm writing that book, I was still going through a lot of it at the time, but it allowed me to get it on the page and feel metaphorically lighter with every kind of word, every honest word that I wrote. And then by the time, and it was actually kind of a real blessing that it did get pushed back that year, because it really allowed me to make peace and step away from that story. Yes, it's my story, but it's like, okay, I've got that extra year now and be like, I'm okay with my deepest, darkest things now going out into the world. And it's like, all right, they will find who they're meant to find. And now it's our story. So I do think it is one of the greatest healers. But I do think there's a very fine line, and especially with social media, of being in an okay space to share what you're going through. So, and that's unique to every individual. Yeah.
And do you have like, now that you don't have the the jewelry business,
Mm-hmm.
like yourself and you're sharing in that way, do you have now, I want to say boundaries, but the word seems a bit harsh, principles maybe, or areas to talk about that, like on your social media where you're like, I share this, but I don't share this. Like, do you have those things with yourself, or is it more fluid?
It's probably more fluid. Like, I definitely am very protective of things. Like, I'm enjoying social media less and less personally. Like, I'd much rather be creating whereas before it was very much, we've created this, here it is now, kind of that really quick, cause and effect, I guess. But no, I think the boundary comes in the moment of, like, if I'm angry about something, I'm not going to sit there and type out share a story about it. If I'm still processing something,
Dear
like,
Carol,
yeah,
this is what I want you to know.
Mad in Manhattan. So it definitely goes back to that feeling filter at any given time. And there's probably stuff I've written that I will pick up in a few years and then share. But then there's also stuff where I am, processing it, or an observation of it in the moment. So the boundary is definitely more fluid.
Yeah, got it. Okay, and so next question is, how are you changing right now, or how have you been changing lately?
Yeah, I think it is still the process of closing the jewelry business and then stepping in. I've been in the creative arts for 2 decades now, professionally. But now as a writer, I feel like I'm not back to square one by any means, but like, even I had a meeting the other day and they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" I'm like, "Oh, I guess I'm a writer." And I'm like, "You have a book out, you're writing every day, like you are a writer." But really trying to, catch myself on those things and step into that space, not arrogantly, because I know I'm very new in that area of the creativity, but confidently that, this 2 decades of lived experience holds weight, and finding the home for that. So I think that's definitely, and I think still, the world coming out of COVID, still everyone's still navigating what that means. And I think on a cellular and energetic level, whether we think we're processed it or not, I think there's still things in there that are in flux.
Totally. Okay, so just finally, what returns you to the wisdom within?
Oh, I think looking back and being reflective at times where the universe has delivered in a way that I could never have imagined. So I look back at moments at that crossroads that I spoke about. I look back on things where I just thought my world was ending, and then it obviously didn't, and life became so much more beautiful on the other side of it. I think, I really find that when I'm drifted from that internal wisdom and calmness, is very much when I think I have to control everything and I need it on my timeline, and I need to know. So definitely, obviously the goal is the surrender and the trust. And I think I look back and journaling, I think over the years, when synchronicity has played huge roles, and I find that very comforting in times when I need to return to myself.
I love it. Thank you. Soul Inquiry is a practice where we enter into a direct dialogue with our inner wise self. Today's Soul Inquiry prompt is, what are you being called to release in order to create space for something new? What are you being called to release in order to create space for something new? And what is one baby step you can take in that direction today? Let's all share a deep breath together as we close this sacred space we've stepped into. I'm so grateful for you being here. If you'd like to keep returning to yourself and returning here with me, then please hit subscribe. If you love this podcast, leaving a review or 5-star rating really helps others to find it too. You can find the show notes from today's episode, plus all of Samantha's info, over at rebeccacampbell.me/podcast. Thanks for returning.